Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I trust it's been a good week. It's certainly been a busy one for me, but most enjoyable, I must admit. I look forward to hosting the Banking CEO of the Year for 2014, the National Bank CEO, Munir Ahmed, at Mindspeak tomorrow. Mindspeak is, of course, held at the Intercontinental. We serve breakfast from 9:30. We start at 10 and we're done by 12. We've had Christine Lagarde, Dr. Naikuni, Charles Ireland, and the East African Secretary General Richard Sesibera this year. And there is a link on the front page and on Rich Wrap-Ups of what is Mindspeak, if you care to have a look. I'd like to thank the Australian High Commissioner, Jeff Tooth, for an outstandingly interesting lunch. Thank you, Jeff. That was very interesting indeed. Of course, the Australian Navy's been doing some work, and they've dumped about $400 million worth of heroin in the Indian Ocean that they've interdicted, amongst many other things. Jeff's a close friend, and he had quite a tale to tell. I attended the Polish National Day celebration yesterday evening in Muthaiga, and the ambassador said we remain at the heart of Europe, and very much so, and I can confirm that from my visit to Warsaw and Katowice. And then I also attended the AFDB's 50th anniversary celebration this morning at the Villa Rosa Kapinski. I took this photograph of engineer Michael Kamau, and you can see Gabriel Negati of the AFDB, Carol Kariuki, Mr. Churcher, the Energy Cabinet Secretary, whose number I didn't have, and I told him and he gave it to me, so that's good. And I went to that after participating in Mandarini's property seminar, where this prediction caught everyone's attention. I basically said that I could see the shilling going to 60 in the next 48 to 60 months. But near term, we have a little bit of shilling weakness because a lot of dividends are being uplifted to parent companies at this time of year. But looking forward, I think we're going to have a system awash with dollars, predominantly via oil and gas. Mombasa is obviously front and center of my mind. I'll put up a photograph of the sunset in Mombasa, and tourists are being evacuated as we speak. It's rather the worst case I've seen, in fact. The Economic Times tweeted a photograph where Narendra Modi is visiting his mother, who says, "My son will lead the country towards development." Prime Minister Manmohan Singh called Shri Modi and congratulated him on his party's victory in the Lok Sabha elections. That's Dr. Manmohan Singh. They're on a course for a landslide victory, as I said they would be, and clearly it's going to be a definitive win, and the Indian markets have reacted extremely positively, as I said they would. Interesting piece in Bloomberg saying the old EU paradigm of getting everyone to join a rules-based system has run into a wall now because the Russians won't play ball. Confronted by the prospect of a new Iron Curtain in Russia's borderlands, the European Union's largest countries are turning the other way. Germany, France, Italy and Spain are all cutting back on defense, just as the swathe of countries on the EU's eastern flank from the Baltic Sea to Romania ramp up arms spending. Estonia, which borders Russia, spent a greater share of its national output on defense than France in 2013 for the second year running, NATO figures show. Europe's east-west divergence underscores Vladimir Putin's leverage against EU leaders who lack the will and the means to face down his efforts to rebuild influence in the buffer area between Russia and NATO member states. Bloomberg is saying, left unchecked in Ukraine, Putin is tearing up the post-Cold War order that saw the EU and NATO expand to 10 former Soviet satellites as Russia could only look on. Many, if not most, European countries have no appetite, and this is important because it speaks to the daylight between the US and Europe, for a conflict with Russia. Sergei Lavrov said yesterday in a Bloomberg television interview, the US wants to keep Europe on a short leash, he said. The uncertainty fuels an arc of instability from Belarus south through Ukraine to the Caucasus that Techow says will be the new normal in Europe. A unified response is all the more difficult because of a sense of disconnect between the EU's eastern periphery and its core, where life goes on much as normal. In those countries racked by the debt crisis, things are even starting to pick up. Indeed they are, I could see that. Russia regards the NATO frontline states of the Baltic Sea region and possibly in the Black Sea region as a sort of soft underbelly of the alliance. This is the Estonian defense minister. He called for a stronger NATO footprint on the soil of frontline states. Russian President Vladimir Putin put up a photograph taken of him by Bloomberg on May 12, 2014. And then it turns out that today is also not only the AFDB's 50th anniversary, but the half-century anniversary of Dr. Strangelove. Mein Führer, I can walk, screams Dr. Strangelove, Peter Sellers, the ex-Nazi nuclear scientist, rising from his wheelchair to salute the American president at the climax of Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Stanley Kubrick's satirical masterpiece is now half a century old, and it remains as outrageously prankish, juvenile and derisive as ever, which, given the subject of nuclear annihilation, is exactly right. The movie is an apocalyptic sick joke. The demented General Jack Ripper, Sterling Hayden, who thinks the commies are using fluoridation to destroy his bodily fluids. He withholds his essence from women, dispatches a group of B-52s loaded with H-bombs to destroy Soviet targets. It's an extraordinary film. President Merkin Muffley, Sellers again, tries to recall them. He even helps the Soviet Union to destroy some of the planes. But after all sorts of misadventures, one B-52 gets through, setting off a Soviet-built doomsday machine. And it really is a remarkably good film, and it makes me think, how secular life is, given the current circumstances in the world. I'll put up a photograph of Dr. Strangelove as played by Peter Sellers. Currency markets, the euro, of course, has been wrestled lower, 137.21. Have a look at yesterday's rich wrap-ups, where I refer to what Bin Smaggy said, and essentially it's been a consensus-building exercise, and that consensus has been reached at the ECB, and they're going to pull the trigger big time, and therefore the euro is going to remain on the back foot. Dollar index came off 80.02. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen said the US has further to go to achieve a healthy economy. She's not keen on the dollar rising too much. The Japanese yen, 101.57, headed for its first back-to-back weekly gain in more than 3 months, and that's been on a safe haven bid. Swiss franc 0.8903, the pound 168, that's firmed up a little bit. Talk of the pound's demise, very premature. Aussie 0.9345, India Rupee 58.85, rose 0.6%, touch 58.62. This is the strongest since June, and I think it's going to 57.50. South Korean won 10.2466, the Real 221.88. Egyptian pound 7.1125. It's been losing ground of late since it's crossed 7. South African rand 10.3904. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and we're back towards the top of the range. Yellen is talking it down. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that, and just say that Draghi is set to pull the trigger, and the euro might well have topped out now. Data yesterday showed euro GDP rose 0.2% in the 3 months through March, half as much as economists forecast in matching growth in the fourth quarter. Dollar yen, that's at a safe haven bid. I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. Touched 101.32 yesterday, which was the strongest since March 19. Gold back below 1300, 1293.64. I think it's going to break lower and sharply at some point. Crude oil at 101.15 is expensive in my view. Prices rallied 1.1% this week, but obviously news flow out of places like Ukraine. Refer Mark Rothko's painting Untitled Red, Blue, Orange, which I'm going to show you, sold for $56.2 million at Phillips in New York. Ultra high net worth items continue to outperform everything else. Anyway, you care to look, I'll put up a 1-year chart of the Indian Rupee, last at 58.85, fresh to more than 2014 highs, and nearing my objective of 57.50. The Sensex is at all-time highs as well. I'll put up a long-term chart. You can see what I mean. A little bit of profit taking right at the end of the close, but I think ultimately it's got more to go to the top side. Coming to Africa, interesting piece called How Benghazi Birthed the New Normal in Africa by Nick Turse and Tom Engelhardt. And it's interesting, I've spoken about it before, I'm not going to go into detail, but if you're interested, do have a look at this. He says all of this is but part of what the US military has started to call the new normal in Africa. Interesting report came out by Ernst & Young. This is their Africa Attractiveness Survey. In 2013, Africa's share of global FDI projects reached 5.7%, its highest level in a decade. Average size of FDI projects increased to $70.1 million in 2013 from $60.1 million in 2012. In terms of destination, South Africa maintained its position as the top FDI destination. Emerging hotspots for investment are Kenya, Ghana, Mozambique, Uganda, Tanzania, and Zambia. African investors nearly tripled their share of FDI projects over the last decade. Intra-African investment has also driven job creation on the continent. Diversification of economic activity in Africa gathering pace, growing employment levels, creating a new consumer class. This has paved the way for increasing FDI in consumer-focused services and manufacturing sectors. Sectors other than extractive industries are growing in importance. The most striking observation from this year's survey is how far Africa's perceived attractiveness has improved. In less than 5 years, Africa has risen to become the second most attractive investment destination in the world, tied with Asia. South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya are considered the most attractive investment destinations in sub-Saharan Africa. Morocco is seen as leading destination for doing business in North Africa. This is always interesting. The perception gap between those already doing business on the continent and those with no business presence remains striking. So the ones who know something are excited about it. The ones who know nothing are not excited. So not that great an issue. It actually leaves more opportunity for people. More specifically, those already active on the continent rank it as by far the most attractive investment destination in the world today. There's a PDF, so if you want to go to Rich Wrap-Ups, you can find a link for that. There's a very good infographic as well. And as I said, the share of intra-African investments in the continent's FDI reached a record 23% last year, up from just 8% 5 years ago. Now that was the FT looking at this report, talking about the types of African companies that are going regional. South African company ShopRite, which has 150 outlets in 16 African countries outside its home market, sold more cans of Red Bull, the energy drink, in 5 shops in Angola last year than all of its 382 outlets in South Africa. For example, Dangote is spreading, and then there are plenty of others. Then I jumped to this comment I found in another report by a fellow called Emmanuel Appiah. They talk about economic growth, but we don't see it. And that is the greatest challenge, because it's been very narrow still. Trickle down is not happening at any kind of meaningful speed, and we've got very young population of Africans all plugged into the 21st century, whose expectation levels have risen considerably higher than any preceding generation. South African all share up 8.18% this year, just off a record high. Dollar versus rand at 10.3902. I still think we err towards 10 before we go to 11. Egyptian pound, that's been on the slide, last trading at 7.1125. I came across this interview via a tweet by Reuters World, and I'll put up a photograph of Sisi. Asked what message he has for US Barack Obama, Sisi said, "We are fighting a war against terrorism." The Egyptian army is undertaking major operations in the Sinai, and he was always strong on that because he knew that was going to resonate in Washington, basically protecting Israel. So it is not transformed into a base for terrorism that will threaten its neighbors and make Egypt unstable. If Egypt is unstable, then the entire region is unstable, he said. We need American support to fight terrorism. We need American equipment used to combat terrorism. He said neighboring Libya, which has descended into chaos following the Western-backed uprising that toppled Gaddafi, was becoming a major security threat to Egypt, with jihadis infiltrating across the border to fight security forces. So the West must understand that terrorism would reach its doorstep unless it helped eradicate it. The West has to pay attention to what's going on in the world, the map of extremism and its expansion. This map will reach you inevitably, he said. Sisi said that the West must understand that terrorism should reach its doorstep unless it helped to eradicate it. In a sideswipe, and this was interesting, at Western policy on Syria, where US and European support for rebels fighting for 3 years to bring down President Bashar al-Assad has seen a proliferation of jihadism and the fragmentation of the country, Sisi stressed the need to maintain the unity of Syria. Otherwise, we will see another Afghanistan. I don't think you want to create another Afghanistan in the region. It's interesting support for Bashar in a roundabout, extrapolated manner. And then talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. They've lost their connection with Egyptians, accusing them of violence. Unjustified violence towards Egyptians made them not only lose sympathy among Egyptians, but also meant that they have no real chance of reconciliation with society. Very nuanced, very sophisticated, and surprisingly independent in his support of Bashar in a unitary Syrian state. The Egyptian stock market is Africa's best this year. It's up 27.93%, and it's closed at a fresh more than 60-month high yesterday. And I wrote about this on the 20th of January, where I said if the equity markets had a vote in Egypt, Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi would actually get one of those impossible to believe votes of 99.8%. The Nigerian all share is down 2.65% this year. The US said in general Nigeria has failed to mount an effective campaign against Boko Haram. This is Alice Friend, the Pentagon's principal director for African Affairs, at the hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee's Africa Subcommittee. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 4.88% this year, but consider that there has been a more than 23% drop in the value of the cedi over the same period. The Zambian Kwacha fell in world's worst retreat yesterday. Weakened shortage of foreign exchange. Kwacha, the continent's second worst performer after Ghana's cedi. The sell-off will probably continue. Kwacha dropped as much as 2.1%, biggest intraday fall since March 27, traded 1.6% weaker at 665.50. A record low and the worst today amongst 172 global currencies tracked by Bloomberg. Yields on Zambia's Eurobond sold last month in June-April 2024 fell for a third day to 7.51%. This is a record low. Zambia, Ghana and South Africa have been affected by homegrown challenges along with the effect of Federal Reserve stimulus cuts on markets, according to Fitch. And I wrote about this on the 28th of April when I said rising fiscal imbalances region's Achilles heel. And I was talking about Africa in general. I said, my takeaway is the tailwinds remain favorable, but the markets are no longer as benign, and that we would be wise to look very closely how policymakers are getting crunched in places like Ghana and Zambia. A more than 30% collapse in a currency is a direct cause and effect of poor policy making. I was saying then, putting Humpty Dumpty together again is not an easy thing. I came across a number of photographs from, on Tuesday, the body of the 26-year-old French photojournalist Camille Lepage was found in a car driven by members of the so-called anti-Balaka militia force in the Boer region of the Central African Republic. Lepage, who moved to the country last year to document the conflict in the region, worked as a freelancer and was on assignment when she was killed. The two photographs that I featuring, one was taken on October 13th, 2013, in Benghazi, Mbombo Prefecture, Central African Republic, and shows soldiers of the national military using the local police station as their base, and the second was taken around the same date, and it's at the general headquarters of the FOMAC. The US government banned ivory imports from Zimbabwe because it does not have sufficient information on the number of elephants in Zimbabwe to determine if population of the animals is sustainable. This happened on April 22nd. And this is a bit of the story. We were caught napping by the US ban as we didn't anticipate it. Langton Masunda, who was the chairman of a conservancy in Matabele land. We are now have to look at Russian and Chinese markets and at other nationalities interested in sport hunting, which I think they should ban, instead of relying on Americans who think that they are the only ones with the big bucks. Zimbabwe's hunters, who undergo some of the most rigorous training in Africa, can earn as much as $2,000 a day, helping clients from America, Eastern Europe and Spain shoot anything from antelope to lion and elephant. A client will pay about $30,000 in permit fees and for the hire of a professional hunter to get an elephant. A lion kill will likely cost a hunter about $55,000. That's horrible. On that note, I'll put up 3 photographs, one from September 2013 of the elephants in the Amboseli, one from way back when I was visiting the Samburu and I saw the elephants crossing the Owasso-Nura River, and one from Christmas time when I saw the elephants crossing the Galana River in Savo East. A 40-year-old albino woman was murdered for her body parts in Tanzania this week in an attack believed to be linked to witchcraft. This is the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, flagging that up. At least 73 people with albinism have been killed since 2000 in Tanzania. Kenya scolds Britain and the US over unfriendly travel warnings. Kenya rebuked Britain, the US, Australia and France on Thursday for issuing warnings about travel to the East African country, and particularly its main port city, after a series of attacks there. Kenya called the attacks unfriendly, saying they would increase panic and play into the hands of those behind the gun and grenade assaults. Kenya has blamed bomb blasts in the capital, Nairobi, on the al-Qaeda-linked Somali group Al-Shabaab. The warnings may further damage Kenya's tourism sector, one that President Uhuru Kenyatta said is on its knees following the raids in the capital and along the Indian Ocean coastline. Karanja Kibicho, the Principal Secretary of the Foreign Affairs Department, said Kenya was assuring its visitors of utmost security and safety, and lamented the advisories by countries also involved in its fight against the militants. The advisories, therefore, are obviously unfriendly acts coming from our partners, who have equally borne the brunt of global terrorism and no doubt understand the repercussions of the terror menace, he said. The challenges arising from acts of terrorism require concerted efforts to fight it, and not behaving in a manner that accelerates it by causing fear and panic, he said. Kenyan authorities say they do not know of any imminent threats. Well, I was at that Polish embassy event, and I can tell you absolutely every single individual there said that the alert is sky high, and all of them felt that there, for the grace of God, goes another Westgate episode. Britain's Foreign Office told its citizens they should avoid travel to Mombasa and the surrounding area. The US Embassy warned its citizens of a continued threat of potential terrorist attacks in the country. Kenya said Australia and France issued similar warnings. This, in conclusion, the United Kingdom warning, I believe, is the highest warning ever issued for this particular area. The British tourists have been leaving Kenya as of yesterday. I've got a friend with a lot of beds down there who says they're being evacuated. And I wrote about this severally, but most recently when I said, the recent bombings in Abuja and last year's attack on Westgate confirmed the potency of asymmetric risks. And I said African markets have taken these risks in their stride. They might stumble if these asymmetric risks ratchet higher. I'll put up a photograph of Westgate that I took from CNBC's office on the 19th floor in town. Another photograph of Mombasa Island. This was Boxing Day last year, sunset, one of the Vipingo Beach, which is north of Mombasa, from 497 days ago. Very beautiful it is too. And finally, one of the Southern Palms, the seaside in Diani, just outside the Southern Palms where we stayed at Christmas. On the 7th of February, I was writing about several things: base titanium, ilmenite, Likoni Ferry, security, and senator. And I described this moment as I sat on the Likoni Ferry deep in the milieu of the overwhelming tide of humanity, getting a little bit nervous, frankly. I could not help recalling Antonio Gramsci. The old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum there arises a great diversity of morbid symptoms. And I said, I suppose post-Westgate I notice how often in a day I am at a standstill, and that the density of humanity around me means I am in fact helpless, whether it's the Likoni Ferry or crawling at 2 mph around the Likoni environs or stuck in a jam on Waiyaki Way. These are asymmetric sweet spots, as it were. I said I follow trends, the trend is your friend, and whether it was the Ibrahim Index, which noted at the subcategory level no region in Africa has improved in rule of law or personal safety since 2000, or the WEF report of September 2013, which ranked us 125th with regard to the security situation and characterized it as worrisome. And I said, once the security genie escapes the bottle, it will be practically impossible to bottle him again. Then I was talking about the birth pangs of the new in particularly the surge of bandwidth per capita capacity in Kenya, which really was off the charts when you look at it. I'll put up a photograph I took of the Likoni Channel. The Kenya shilling has been softening of late, and this might well be a 2014 low at 87.453. And this is all around big full-year dividend payments which have been made and now being uplifted to parent companies like Diageo, Barclays, PLC, and so forth. The Nairobi Oil Share is up 10.303% in 2014. The NSE 20 is up a marginal 0.372% so far this year. Africa Oil is saying they've discovered new reserves in 2 northern Kenya wells. This is on Business Daily. And Pan Africa Insurance announcing that they now have a 5% stake in the family bank. Of course, Pan Africa Insurance has been performing extremely well this year. That's as much of the insurance sector, and Jubilee is finally playing catch-up as well. The oil share turned 0.366% high. Yesterday it was a humdinger in a high-octane session. Total turnover 1.757 billion shillings, which is the sort of thing that Nairobi Securities Exchange listing will like to see. Internationals remain relentlessly on the buy side as they've been across the continent, especially for the big cap stocks. Buyers stepped up for Safaricom after a 2-day drawdown of just 2.38% on light profit taking. It's now back trading higher than when it was before the earnings release. Kakuzi up 38.947% in 2014, rallied by the daily maximum. Safaricom, as I said, large bids started to pepper the boards yesterday. And the point of the takeaway for me is there are not many countries that can lift their dividend by 50%. And I think that takeaway is gradually sinking into people's heads. Kenya Airways traded firmer, 1.99% higher to close at 12.80. They'll release full year results June 4. Housing finance has rallied a mighty 16.66% over the preceding last 2 sessions through this morning. So it's had a big surge. Equity Bank eased marginally on very heavy volume of 11.443 million shares, but it had a huge rally in the last 4 weeks. 27.34% was overdue about of profit taking. Co-op Bank yesterday announced first quarter results slightly behind, but that was because of a change in the tax regime. They were getting a concession for listing, which was quite valuable. EABL closed at 300, and that's had a blistering rally of plus 35.71% since closing at a 52-week low in the middle of February when it flushed out all the week longs. Kenol Kogel traded its highest volume session yesterday, eased 1.162% to close at 850, but it's now trading substantially higher. I think someone has taken all the stock that was there, and therefore that's bullish. Business Daily was carrying a story yesterday about Kenya's antitrust authority may force Lafarge to sell some of its interests in the East African country, and that's largely seen as the word on the street is that people are trying to ease Lafarge out of East African Portland cement and basically get Dangote in, and that might well be a fact. Once again, thank you for stopping by. Wishing a great weekend. Hoping to see you at Mindspeed tomorrow. Breakfast from 9:30, Intercontinental. It's free entry.